the IANS website, International Association of Near-Death Studies, they don't just have um, the euphoric highlights of near-death experiences. They also include distressing ones, and I can't say mine was a full distressing experience, but certainly, the beginning onset was quite distressing. But once I was able to surrender to a greater power of my own suffering, my own struggle, was when I was able to cross over. And so when I lost my own physical breath of my body, I was able to surrender to the breath of eternity.
Welcome to Earth to the Other Side. I'm your host, John Glasspool, and today I'm speaking with Jacob Cooper, who's a clinical social worker, certified Reiki master who specializes in past life regression, and also has a book called Life After Breath and has another one coming out soon. Welcome to the show, Jake. So nice to have you.
Thank you. A real honor, John, to be here.
Thank you very much. So you had a near-death experience, and this is going back a little while, back when you were 3 years old. So I'm going to give the floor to you and let you talk to us about your near-death experience.
September 1993, I had pertussis, known as whooping cough, and I went to a playground, in September morning, and as a result of pertussis and going to the playground, I suffocated climbing a ladder up on a slide, at the top of the ladder. And after suffocation, my whole body, wasn't working. It was just one layer of my body that stopped working and out of my control. And all of a sudden, everything just powered down within my body and within my brain, and I really crossed over to the other side and had this, incredible near-death experience. I encountered a limiting word, but a universal word of understanding of God, of the source of all that ever is and ever was. I encountered endless array of angels and spiritual guides, soul family members, awareness of my own, purpose as a soul, and even past life awareness. Within my own near-death experience, I was aware of two guides that I had, a male and a female guide, that were with me. They were the most profound, beautiful guides that I could they were beyond words. But also, and I chronicle this in Life After Breath, that I just couldn't remember that I forgot that they were there with me on each step of the journey. It was almost embarrassing on my end that I forgot that, wow, they were there with me. And there was a transparency that sometimes we just view that we're isolated in this experience, that there's no one else watching us, but there's record button there, but there's not only that, but there's unconditional loving support on the other side from our soul family members, as well as our own spiritual guides. That's different from the angels that I saw in my near-death experience, in which my body was on the ground, irresponsive, after going down the slide, climbing the ladder, going down the slide, people looking at me. I saw an endless sea of angels that was right in front of me. And these are very youthful in their presentation, and they looked almost identical. But the distinguishing component between my spirit guides and the angels that I saw, they all are grouped under angels, was that the spirit guides were a lot more grounded, and kind of connected to myself and this earth. Whereas the angels that I saw, they were like just kind of doing their thing. They weren't focused on me, but they were focused on the macro kind of healing of the planet, and they didn't have separate identity. They were just kind of unified. They were just there to love and serve the planet. So what I really learned from that, and for viewers listening, is the near-death experience, parts of it felt like I was going a million miles away from anything that this earth reality was, but then again, not really too, because parts of this were just a thin veil, a thin layer right over this earth plane. So the angels are around us constantly, and they're floating around, here. They're right here. And so I think if we listen enough, we tune into that enough, they could assist us. They could assist us with loving compassion, wisdom, the ability to just, have those veils not as separated. Because really, yes, we're here to create heaven on earth, but we're also beings of heaven here on this earth. And if we remember that, this world could be such a different place.
When you say assist us, you mean mentally, emotionally, spiritually, or can they physically come in with our permission and assist us physically on this plane?
They can. We just have to be open to it. I know there's been people who have had and it's when it's your time, we all have different exit points, but I think there are people who've had like a lot of like physical illnesses, and beings from the other side have worked, and they've seen that, they've worked with their experiences, and they have these modern miracles that, doctors aren't able to really, understand how they were on the brink and then all of a sudden something internally totally shifted. So yes, they work with us medically where they could like, manipulate the body or get it kind of adjusted and corrected, or something that was totally broken to be fixed. So the miracles happen by these beings. You just have to kind of be open to that, allow that, recognize, that, and surrender to that. So many of us in this human experience have clung on to the ego and forgotten our essence, our soul, and who we are and where we come from. We're more likely to hold on to this temporary identity versus having some degree of recollection of something beyond this. And I think plenty do, but it takes an empowered soul to remember something more than what we were taught in this world.
Mm-hmm. Most definitely. So you were 3 years old, and did you have any, religious background with your family? Did you grow up Jewish, Christian, or otherwise?
Yeah, I am congruent with a lot of near-death experiencers, and by that I say plenty of near-death experiencers in their own experience have had nothing to do with the prior life that they lived in many ways. By that I mean, I grew up Jewish Orthodox, Jewish traditional, observance, but within my near-death experience, there was nothing of that. And many people who have religions or atheistic, agnostics, whatever the case may be, their near-death experience has nothing to do with their prior belief systems, usually. So that was profound in the sense that, I had all these beings that I guess were, deeply rooted within the Bible, from angels. If you look at the Bible, it's highly mystical, but yet, religion kind of focuses on the rituals and laws of things. They don't get into that as much. They're more about, okay, what can we do in this life versus that kind of mystical kind of stuff. But it's there if you look deeply. But it wasn't something that was taught or really highly focused on. And especially the encounter with Christ consciousness that I had. And certainly, Jesus himself was, Jewish, grew up in Israel, but was more of a reform social kind of rabbi, but certainly wasn't someone that was accepted, or just highlighted within my upbringing.
So take us from that moment between being conscious and crossing the veil up on that slide. What happened first?
I was always conscious, but I think I was connected to my superconscious, conscious, which is an awareness far greater than this reality and our limiting kind of thoughts, in the self, your awareness beyond time, beyond space. And so I would say the biggest transformation was from fear to love, which is at the core of any. I know we classify near-death experience and we focus it on one thing, but to me, they're all very similar paths up the mountain of awareness, from a spiritual transformative experience to an NDE to an OBE. I look at them as one and the same to me. They're just kind of different ways, but they all involve some. I guess the near-death experience is different because it involves a shakeup of the physical body, and its continuity, through traumatic events or through illness, whatever it is. And so you crossing that rubber band over. And then obviously when you have a near-death experience, you don't stay there, you come back, but you come back much different. I was incredibly fearful through suffocation. That was one of the most traumatic and scariest moments of my life to this day. I don't want to sugarcoat that. So I think that's part of the reason why I remembered it, is the trauma, that was involved with it, which is something that isn't as highlighted in near-death experience. But if you look at, let's say, the IANDS website, International Association of Near-Death Studies, they don't just have the euphoric highlights of near-death experiences. They also include distressing ones. And I can't say mine was a full distressing experience, but certainly, the beginning onset was quite distressing. But once I was able to surrender to a greater power of my own suffering, my own struggle, was when I was able to cross over. And so when I lost my own physical breath of my body, I was able to surrender to the breath of eternity. Hence the title of my book, Life After Breath, which emphasizes the breath as something that goes beyond the body, but also enhances our experience here. It's our lifeline in this physical body, and it's our lifeline when we cross over. Surrendering to the eternal breath is something we do here and the here now and the hereafter. All that, kind of classical near-death experience that is highlighted in Dr. Raymond Moody's book, who's a friend of mine and on the cover endorsement of Life After Breath, in his best-selling book, Life After Life, which I kind of did a homage to Life After Breath in my book, and he's cool with that. But yes, the tunnel was there. Interestingly enough, not everyone has the tunnel, and a lot fewer people than not have that, and they find somehow religion doesn't necessarily influence it, but maybe the verbiage or how we describe it in the Western civilization, and would include a lot more people to have the tunnel experience. But I had that as also this great transformation from sheer darkness and terror to pure beyond euphoria, and a time that felt stuck in suffocating, which felt like eternal hell, to crossing over, which felt like eternal euphoria.
Yeah, I
But there
bet.
was, and it's funny, over here you could chop up time. You could have yesterday, you could have tomorrow. It goes by a linear clock. On there, you can't divide time, even if you try.
Yeah, it's all
It's
happening at the same
non-linear,
time.
it's eternal. And that is something hopefully for viewers to not really register with the left part of your brain, because our consciousness can only understand itself by the degree of which it is seeing the world you're coming from. And as you're elevating your consciousness to even higher realms, you can understand some of this esoteric understanding.
And when did you actually, I guess, realize that the experience you had was a death experience or a near death experience?
Right.
You were three, so did you come to this understanding at three? Where after all this happened and you regained consciousness and you were surrounded by people you knew and etc. How were you defining this in your head at that age? Do you remember?
Right. Well, certainly the word death didn't come to mind. And you even ask Raymond Moody, he would tell you the term near death experience probably wasn't his first term, because it's, it has something to do with death, but also everything not to do with death. In a sense, you face death and you recognize there is no death when you have these things. Death of the body, but the understanding of the eternity of the soul, no matter what. If you listen to people who specialize in childhood and infant near-death experiencers, and one of them is an individual I would recommend for the show if you haven't had her on. She's, uh, just a tremendous pioneer and on the Mount Rushmore of near-death experience researchers. In my point, that would include Raymond and Kenneth Ring, Prin von Lommel, some of those people. But her name is PMH Atwater, and she says that infants and children who have these experiences, you know, usually it's around 20 to 30 years of integration. That doesn't mean that the events change. It doesn't mean that a part of you doesn't understand them. It means the groundedness of that experience, or the ability to integrate it, in your life, today, takes some time. And I could attest that's true with me. I recently had a conversation with my father, because I separated spirituality and religion, or kind of synagogue and state, so to speak.
Yeah.
So I kept this experience very private to myself. And that's congruent with a lot of near-death experiencers. It's something so powerful and so sacred that we don't go around telling people. It's a little different than like the boy that you see from Heaven is for Real, who's just, shouting from the table and telling sometimes it does happen, but a lot of times, understatedly, people take time to process these things, much like anything traumatic or powerful in life. Um, but my father told me that when I was a young boy, I came up to him and I said, Dad, something very powerful happened that day, at the playground. And I said, I can't tell you now, but when I get older, it will make sense to you.
Okay.
And I didn't recognize that. I don't remember saying that, but he told me that.
That's
you
so
know.
interesting.
And so was very powerful to see those words at that time. And, it just,
Wow.
I'm an older spirit. So from a young age, I always had, a deeper vocabulary, deeper sense of awareness. I don't pretend to know why there are older spirits and younger spirits, or I think it's a matter of balance act within the world. No one is better or worse. It's just a matter of different roles to play, and they're all unique and sacred and special. You know,
How do you think your life would have been different had you not had this near death experience?
hard to say. I mean, a part of me looks at this as a double-edged sword. Kind of like what I walked into was what I walked into, but what I walked out of it became my responsibility. Much like any traumatic event, it's not our fault for what happened, but it becomes a responsibility,
Mhm.
to make sense of it, to heal from it, to grow from it. That's where the real work lies. And so I'm grateful. I think this experience, in a way, shaped and made me who I am. And I think the positive components is um, a lack of fear in a sense. And it's not like I don't have that, but when a lot of people get scared about certain things, I don't have that. To me, it's more fearful to not live an inspired life than it is to hold on to fear governing your life. And so the guiding force that I run my life by is by a much bigger voice than, I guess, the voice of logic or reason that run a lot of people's lives.
Mhm.
But I think sometimes it's been a hindrance because when you have this experience and years later in life, you're so prone to wanting to be the savior, the hero. It could get you that way. And I think that's not the meaning of life. I just was watching this powerful movie. I don't know if you or your viewers has seen it, and it's called this movie called Soul. It's by Pixar and Disney,
Wonderful movie.
and that is a book that I will be putting on my recommendation list for the Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder, my next book, which you could talk about. But I think one of the major points of that movie is we get so caught up in this bronze ring that we're chasing, or this kind of role and speaking in front of people or writing all these best-selling books, to recognize that once we have that, that it's not satisfying. It's not enough. We want the next thing. And
Mhm.
so I don't want to give the whole move away, but it was very Buddhisty in a sense that it's the small things, it's being alive, it's being in the moment, the little things that give us meaning. So I don't think someone asked me what's the meaning of life, and I say to give every moment meaning, to give life meaning, and that's not just the astronomical big things, but it's the small things,
Small things.
that are very significant.
Do you think your experience would have been different had there been a lot more recognizability of NDEs at the time?
I'm very fortunate. When I first, let's say, started reading about these things, it was nothing compared to where it is today.
Mm,
I mean, I didn't go walk around as a kid saying I had a near-death experience.
yeah,
I didn't even have that term.
yeah.
It was just this incredible experience that was beyond words. So I really credit Dr. Raymond Moody for, either no, that wasn't like his first kind of preference was something more kind of academic and niche, but they wanted to make it more mainstream, the terminology of it. Uh, but I credit a book by Betty Eadie, which is called Embraced by the Light, which was gifted to me, which gave me like a universality behind, like, whoa, I wasn't the only one that had this. There are other people, which deflated my balloon a little bit because I was walking around thinking like I was like Harry Potter, like the chosen one, and just now all of a sudden, who's not a near death experience, or who? And then when you go to these conventions, you say you have one. People like, you had just had one. I had five or six or seven, and but I think to have one is like, that was like, I don't want any more of that. So for these five or six or seven or 10 near death experiences, I'll listen, but I don't know. I'm not going to say no. Um, but I think I'm very fortunate with the times. And if you look at today, it's like even like mediums per se, when they're interviewed, it's like half their conversation is on near death experiences. It's just so weird how things have changed radically so much from even like a decade ago to now. It's totally shifted. Where even on Netflix, they include a whole segment in their documentary "Surviving Death" on near death experiences. I've been very fortunate to kind of come up when the tennis ball is coming at the right point and hitting it at the right point. But
Yeah.
I think that was orchestrated, by the powers that be up above.
In your experience, did you have an OBE? Like, did you see your body at all at any time when you were experiencing
Yeah,
it?
I think more times than not, like people have near-death experiences, and under that umbrellas are spiritual transformative experiences, OBEs as well too. So I had that, but I also had an OBE later in my life when I was like an adult. So like a part of me is a bigger skeptic than probably most that you see trolling my book or my page, and that's fine. They're coming up to things with their own conclusions, and I respect that. Um, but it's hard when you have an agenda or when you're closed-minded to the material because you're not open to anything. So I think the biggest thing is to have that degree of kind of like a questioning, but not closing the door on it. I think that's a comfortable place. Otherwise, if you just have blind faith, it could be quite dangerous to listening to some of these interviews and material. You want to come to things with your own conclusions. I think that's a responsible thing. I had an OBE later in life, and like I said, I'm my own biggest skeptic. So this blew off my own, inner skepticism of whatever it is that I had, that this was real. It happened almost like 15 to 20 years later when I was in a synagogue out of all places around the same month of September. Bear in mind, in the Jewish tradition, I had my experience right before the day of Yom Kippur, which is the highest holiday in the Jewish calendar, day in which the soul is, getting itself ready to meet the Creator. And little did I know I was about to meet the Creator, but it wasn't in the confines of a synagogue. It was on a direct experience. So, but then, 20 years later, I was just in a synagogue and then literally came out of my body. But within this body, I saw, this light between us, this light that connected each and every individual and congregant that was sitting there. And I was able to really go to the high parts of the synagogue with attached to my own animal totem. And I just kind of risen out of my body, felt my soul just rise out. And it wasn't an NDE. I was just like, I don't remember taking DMT or ayahuasca that morning. It's just sometimes you have this lobster shell and it's the shell of like awareness that you have, and then it just kind of it's too small for you to have, and then you come up to a new level of awareness, and sometimes it takes these shake-up periods, experiences for you to come into new form. I guess that what it was. It was a new chapter in my life, but I was just able to see this, light connecting everyone. And just kind of dawned on me how we're all connected by this light in the here and the hereafter. But we just forget through our own divisions, through our own, labels of us versus them and this right versus wrong and stuff like that. But the key is to not wait until we cross over to see that, but to be able to remember, who I am, to remember who we are, remember who you are to remember who we are. Yeah.
At what age do you think we all go from being powerful spiritual beings to human beings?
Yeah. I mean, on average, it's like after infancy, the average person loses some of that awareness. Some hold on to it longer. It's like Plato when he spoke about the waters of forgetfulness and stuff like that. Um, some drink less from those waters or more from those waters. Some just hold it on to. But the spiritual practice is a work. I think living here, it's important to continue to enhance that flame, to continue to grow it. I'm a big picture guy, and I look at pictures of even myself or family members or different people. And today we're a very visual world with Facebook and Instagram, but it's kind of like you could look at a picture of a child, and not all times, but the eyes are such windows of our identity. And for a lot of people, their eyes are just dimmed or dimmer than they were when they were a child and they were when they were adult. And you just wonder why. What's the explanation for that? Your eyes should just be the same or even brighter, and I think a lot of us have been taught to throw away the child, to mature, to move that away, and that's kind of how society is wired. I think it's a lot of evasiveness from the present. Our society is always evading the present. In other words, in order to be something, you need to do something. You are enough just as your own inner being is not enough. And I love that saying that we're not a human doing, we're a human being, but most of us are human doings. We're not really human beings. And so I think there's big root of a lot of people who come to this work or losing themselves, and it's rooted in self-esteem. A lot of people have barriers to self-esteem because the world has created their mind instead of their own mind creating their own world, that they are not enough. And I think when you come to this practice, you recognize that you are perfect just as you are, and there's nothing that you need to do, to be that. It's all an experience, and it's all part of your own soul's growth and experience. But it's not like you need, these things to be anything. It's an
Right.
opportunity in a
But
way.
you can have a very, very, very different life and a much better one, even without riches and whatnot, and from a very spiritual perspective, have, and with just by doing very, very simple things like meditation.
When I was a kid, after this experience, my whole life really was much different in a sense that the brain I just had as an understanding as a filter between the two worlds. And once my brain was really shut down due to the deprivation of oxygen, is when everything opened up. But after this, I just remembered having this light within my own brain, and I was having all these subsequent experiences, interdimensional communication, and just higher awareness that I recognized quickly that people around me weren't having. And so through my infancy, childhood, and teenage years, that would lead itself to a lot of premonitions, a lot of awareness, but also even spontaneous past life experiences, which I wouldn't label it as such. And so as a kid, I kept on having like similar visions of like this past life, and it was kind of scary. And it was more, all these kind of things was more of a nuisance than anything. I just kind of wanted to push down the beach ball and be a kid,
Mhm.
but it wouldn't leave me. It was just kind of there, and I would see things and they would happen. It was just, I wouldn't label myself as a psychic or didn't know. It was just annoying, this kind of stuff. But past life regression works in a sense that we have this mind that we're aware of in this moment, but then we also have what we spoke about, this higher mind of awareness, this this web of memories. And so if you believe that you are more than your body, then you're capable of having experiences more than just this body too, in this experience. And so past life regression works with not only memories that happen that you might have, forgotten about early in this life, which we call, and what I do with my clients, as the age regression, but also kind of like the work that Michael Newton does. If you ever read The Journey of Souls, Destiny of Souls, this life in between lives in which which we are on the other side. But also my regressions, go back to other lifetimes, which we label as past. But if you want to get technical, past, present, I was very motivated to give back, because I had all these past life memories, and there wasn't like someone that I knew to go to. And so a lot of this work is given stuff that I experienced at the time, and, kind of like inner child work in a way, and trying to, give back to that next person who might be there where I was. They're able to have an awareness of, yes, we don't die, we go on forever, which is, people could have that in their past life experiences. We go to the time in which their soul left their bodies as the finality point of it. But also a keen awareness to explanation is why we are the way that we are, from psychological makeups, personality, or talents, to maybe some biological patterns. So it's a way to kind of move the needle to the things that aren't helpful that we might be holding on to, but also integration of things that could be helpful,
Mhm.
to be empowered in. It could take work, in practice. It might not be the first session, but within time, when you work on this subconscious mind, it's kind of like a database. And the more cobwebs you take off of that, the more awareness you have of it, the more that you're able to really go into it on a deeper basis.
I guess that maybe there's a possibility, a slight possibility they may have imagined the whole thing, or conjured it up from imagination. Do you know what I mean? Like it didn't actually happen. It's something they
Right.
created in their mind. What do you say to
Sure.
that kind of thing?
I mean, with a lot of my clients, I think it's important to be your own what's called self-scientist, which is highlighted in a book that I'm reading by Dr. Gary Schwartz called Super Synchronicity. By self-scientist, I mean you have to look at the data of what you're experiencing and not just lead to blind faith, but look at some of the data and make up your own conclusions together with your practitioner. So a lot of my clients will experience like themselves living in the medieval times, and they'll describe some of the clothing or some, even like a more niche kind of like, rare period of time, such as like a druid or whatever, um, I would say just do some research. Look at some of the clothing at the time. Look at what you experienced. Within a lot of my clients, we go over the years of where they were, living and some of the descriptives. So there's things that people can do to make sense of it. Maybe it's not, for the first time, it's as extensive as some people who have clear memories of their own address. They could then look up in the town's records and then be able to validate the family members. Like some people have those experiences, but I think what's important is to put some of the pieces of the puzzle together to make more sense. What I also say is, why would people have those memories that they're having? Out of the millions of potential combinations that you could have, why that? There must be a reason, for that on a deeper level. Now, it's one hand if you have an ancient Egyptian, memory. I mean, I think that's one of the longest eras in modern, in civilization. So a lot of people have that, and it makes more sense logically that a lot more souls would have those memories. But if you have something very specific, it's like, why? And you have to kind of like explore that on your own basis.
Jake, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show, on the channel. I really appreciate your time and your wisdom and your experience. Thank you so much for sharing it with everyone.
Thank you for doing the incredible work that you're doing. It really is so needed at today's time. And I say within my next book, wisdom and inspiration is the oxygen of our times. That's really will allow us to propel forward. So you're doing the great work. So thank you.
It's been a real pleasure.